Yeah, welcome to the Making of Me podcast, where we dive into mindset, leadership, and navigating change. Today's guest is Tyler Clapp, a seasoned leadership transition and team dynamics coach with over 15 years of experience as a Volkswagen Group. Tyler helps leaders navigate the in-between space where what used to work no longer does, but the next step aren't obvious. He shows leaders how to make invisible workplace dynamics and adapt without burning out and thrive during transitions, bringing clarity, their perspective, and real world solution to a complex leadership challenge. It's really a pleasure and honor having you on the show. Hello.
Thanks, Arlo. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So, Tyler, what were some of the challenges that shape you into who you have become today?
As I was reflecting on some of the experiences that I've had as a leader, the one that really came to mind that was a lesson that I learned early and definitely continued learning that as I continued on with leadership was when I very first became a leader, and I was promoted into a position that hadn't existed before. It was an internal training position. I was coming from the HR department. I was given a budget, and I was super excited because I thought, great, here I'm going to be able to start with a blank slate. I have some great ideas of how I think I can help improve the performance of our employees, and I couldn't wait to get started. And it ended up being a lot harder than what I thought it was going to be, which was key to the lesson that I learned.
Amazing. Tyler, you explain what to me now when you say leadership doesn't get harder because of skill, but because of context.
Yeah, so, as I was going to say as a leader, but as people in general, we learn over time, and as we get good at something, we learn what works really well and what doesn't work. And so we tend to obviously default to those things based on our experience that has always worked.
Yeah.
And that works out great when the environment is stable and the context doesn't really change. But when the context changes, you have to change your playbook as well. And I find in my experience where a lot of, leaders or, just people in general, whether you're transitioning, to a larger role of leadership or a role that maybe looks similar to your old role, it's easy to assume that the context hasn't shifted, or maybe it's shifted but not very much. And that can be a big mistake, because that's where you start using what has always worked for you before in the past, and then you find out that it's not working now. And that's where sometimes people get stuck, is they don't understand why what has always worked for them in the past is now no longer working.
Amazing. Going to kind of having the skill, and when the context change, everything becomes different. So what were the common or invisible dynamics that trip off leaders during transition?
So what I mean by invisible dynamics are the things that you can feel or sense, but they're hard to describe. For example, you're in a meeting and maybe you're leading that meeting, and you sense that meeting is not going, all that well. You sense that maybe that what you're trying to communicate, to your team that message is not getting across, but you don't really have the perspective or the insight or the understanding in order to be able to diagnose that, to figure out, okay, what is it that I need to change? And so that's what I mean when I say that, leaders, or again, people in general, when you're shifting to a new context, that's what those invisible factors or those invisible dynamics are. They're things that, you can sense that something's not right, but you can't really put your finger on it.
You can sense them, but you can actually put your fingers on it. Thank you so much for sharing. So how can leaders recognize when effort isn't the problem, but the context has changed?
So that is the $1 million question. So one of the One of the first ways that a leader will probably recognize that the context has changed is either similar to what I described. They sense something that's off, or they recognize that suddenly for some reason the decisions that they're making just aren't quite as good of a decision as they used to make. And oftentimes, when leaders find themselves in that position, the question they ask tends to be questions like, well, what did I do wrong? Or what did I miss? Or how do I need to change my approach? And sometimes the answers to those questions, will lead to the correct answer. But if the context has changed, they probably won't. And so instead, leaders should ask questions such as, is there something that I'm missing? I think I understand what's going on here, but it's possible that I don't. So is there something that I'm missing? Or, is there an aspect that I'm not aware of? And so when it comes down to it, it's really about being curious. And so instead of looking at it from a what did I do wrong perspective, look at it more from a curiosity perspective of, gosh, did I miss something? Do I not understand something? Am I assuming something is true when perhaps it's not? And usually when you come from a position of curiosity, that's when you'll start to discover what's really going on and get a better picture of the problem.
Amazing. When the scene change, yeah, they could actually more like get to begin to sense it, and also when the decision they usually used to make doesn't work anymore. That's actually a hint too. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. So, how can experienced leaders avoid falling into our effort trap?
So the first step is to recognize that you might be in one. And the way you can recognize that you might be in an effort trap is if it feels like you're working really hard, you're putting in a lot of effort, but you're not really getting any traction. So if the amount of investment that you're putting in is significantly more than the return on that investment, that's usually a good sign that, perhaps effort is not, the problem here, and maybe it would be wise to look elsewhere. That's not saying that effort, isn't the problem, but that's sort of the point where I generally recommend it might be good to shift your focus and ask different questions, which would be the curiosity questions that I mentioned before.
Curious questions, yeah. When it seems I'm actually more like I'll get to change. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this is really amazing. So, how do you help leaders distinguish between knowing what to do and knowing how to do it in a new roles?
So, a lot of my work focuses on helping. I mean, quite simply, helping the leaders see better. And what I mean by that is, often in my experience, the leaders that I work with, the reason they're really stuck is because they don't understand the terrain that they're in. The context has changed, they're missing something. And so my work really focuses on helping them think about their thinking, So what approach are they taking to try and figure this challenge out? And, might there be some ways that if you looked at it from a different perspective, for example, then maybe you see information that you were missing before that you didn't previously see. And perhaps that information now brings about some new insight on the problem. So that's really sort of the core of my work, is helping leaders see differently and helping them see things that they might have originally missed.
Amazing. Happy leaders to see differently. Yeah, amazing. So, how has more like your journey as a leader been more like starting out from when you actually get started out? And how has it shaped the leader you have become today and how you actually coach leaders?
Wow. I have gone through quite my own personal journey. The situation that I referenced, earlier, about being a brand new leader. I mean, what I learned from that experience was you have to show your work as a leader, particularly if you haven't built that credibility. And the effort trap that I fell into was I thought I wasn't getting support because there was something wrong, with my project. And then I finally realized that no, it wasn't the project. It was the fact that I was a brand new leader and I hadn't built that credibility that they could trust my judgment. And so learning to what I call show my work, or sort of explain the thinking, behind my decisions, that, was a lesson I learned very early on in leadership. And I've just sort of continued to refine it, enhance it. And, as I discover more about myself and my, individual strengths and talents and how I process information, that has just helped me get even better at showing my work and explaining it to people who don't think the way that I do, or who don't see the world, the way that I do. And that lesson, has really shaped the leader that, I ultimately am today.
Amazing. Showing your work and explaining why you do what you do. Yeah, in a very new like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, amazing. So what role does clarity play in reducing stress and conflict during leadership transition?
So I believe clarity is what stabilizes the system. So the reason that the leader, I usually describe it as mental fog. So they're working hard, they're putting in a lot of effort, but for some reason they're not achieving what they wanted to achieve, and they can't figure out why. So I usually describe that sort of that feeling as mental fog. And so clarity helps lift the fog. Because generally, once you understand the terrain and you better understand the environment that you're operating in, it's then much easier to figure out what you should do.
Amazing. Clarity is very, very key, being that, knowing what to do next depends on it. Yeah, it's really amazing. So lastly, what is the common blind spot for leaders who have a lot of experience but are facing new challenges?
That's a great question. And the common blind spot is when the context shifts, it's usually harder for them to recognize it. And that goes back to what I said before. So if you've been a leader for 15 years, have your way of doing things that has worked for you for 15 years, but the world doesn't stand still. And even if you're not moving into a new role or a new company or some type of move, the world is still changing. And so you have to adapt your approach as the world changes. And that's the biggest tripping point, I find, particularly with successful leaders, is, once you find something that works, you tend to stick with it. And that's great, but don't lose sight of the context, because as the context shifts, you need to shift along with it.
So where can my listener learn more about your work and access your resources for navigating leadership transition?
Yeah, so my company is called Dive Deep Development. So if what, I shared today resonated with you and you want to find out a little bit more, you can go to my company website at divedeepdevelopment.com, or I'm also on LinkedIn and I share a lot of thought leadership there. I don't know that I'm the only Tyler Clapp, but there aren't a ton of Tyler Clapp. So if you search Tyler Clapp on LinkedIn, you can probably find me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tyler. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. You just remind us that leadership challenge aren't always about skills. They are always about change, context, and knowing how to adapt. Your insights definitely will help leaders to stop struggling in silence, understand what is really going on, and navigate transitions with confidence and clarity without necessary stress or effort. For my audience who would love to connect with Tyler, check the show notes. You're going to see the link to the LinkedIn and that of this website. Once again, it's really a pleasure and honor have you on the show, Tyler.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me, Arlo.